And so tonight, back to our task at hand, which is how can we create a climate for change? I'm absolutely thrilled to be discussing this today with our panelists. An incredibly interesting mix of people here today. We have Mike Barry, who is, dare I say, a guru in the world of sustainable change, a founding member of Marketing Kind and the former head of sustainability at M&S. Mike is the man behind M&S's pioneering Plan A. And since his time at M&S, he's been consulting with businesses in a range of different sectors. So he brings diverse experience from a commercial perspective, and wide inspiration from his collaboration with businesses through his involvement in the Consumer Goods Forum. We also have Dr. Orit Gal, who's a senior lecturer for strategy and complexity at Regent's University London. Orit's also a tech entrepreneur, and she has an absolutely fascinating theory, if we can call it that, around what's called social acupuncture, which we'll perhaps hear more about as we go through this discussion today. And then lastly, Dhruv. And Dhruv has been described recently by the BBC, sorry to embarrass you, Dhruv, as the solutions whisperer. Dhruv characterises himself by finding disruptive, imaginative ways to bring people together to tackle problems, whether it's how can we build better after coronavirus, how can we solve plastic pollution through the plastic hackathon. He has many strings to his bow, and he is fundamentally an anti-plastic campaigner. He works with the government, he works with the UN, and he's the founder of a venture capital firm that looks to invest in businesses that are in existence for a bigger purpose. And so tonight, I'm going to be asking each of our panelists to share what they believe are the biggest obstacles to tackling climate change, and how marketing can be used as a lever to address those and help us to overcome them. You'll also have the opportunity to put your questions to the panel, and I'd like to urge you, please, to do that through the Q&A feature. So you should see at the bottom of your screens that there's both a chat function where I can see some lively and friendly hellos going on already, and then alongside that there's the Q&A feature. We really want to have ample time to answer your questions later on, and it's much easier for us to manage that if you put your questions in the Q&A feature. If they go in the chat, they risk getting missed. If they go in the Q&A, we'll much more easily spot them and be able to answer them. So questions in there, please. And then we'll come back to them later. And then you'll also hear from Marie Hounslow from Renewable World. And she's going to be talking to us about how we can use our skills to support their work, which helps to make sustainable energy solutions more widely available. And then lastly, and we'll come back to this at the end as well, we only have an hour and a half together, but the conversation will not end there. There'll be the opportunity to engage with us further in the online community space after tonight's gathering. So firstly, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their sort of connection to the issue of climate change. So Orit, you're top left for me. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much, Louise. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Urbanizer, and I'm a senior lecturer for strategy and complexity at Regents. And I am not an expert on climate change, but what I hope I bring to the table is my expertise in how change happens. So how do you make sense of complex environments where there's so many forces and so many players, and how do you identify the potential to really carry on structural changes throughout. Some of the work I've done has also related to climate change and sustainability. I've contributed a bit to the work of ComsLab and Purpose Disruptors, for anyone who knows them, who have done an amazing job in trying to transform the advertising industry into a force for good in this sector. And I think that a lot can be learned from their point of view. So very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much. Mike, shall we hear from you next?
Yeah, delighted to be with you. And I guess as the oldest person by far on this conversation, let me just sort of reflect back over 20 years where I've spent the vast majority of my career working to make production more sustainable. So 90% of our effort was in factories and farms and fields and forests and fisheries. And 10% was about engaging colleagues, investors, and citizens as consumers. That's pivoting now. The next decade ahead is a 50-50 split. Not because we're going to do less on production, we're going to have to do more, far more, because the production systems we have today are broken in terms of their impact on people and planet. Because at the heart of the problem we've got is consumption. In a world where Coca-Cola sells 700 billion servings of its drinks every year, and they're one of the leaders in sustainability, it's no condemnation of them, where before the pandemic, the world consumed 130 billion pieces of clothing and footwear in 2019. That's what's driving the problem. We can change things to a degree behind the scenes by making those factories and farms less bad, but fundamentally we need to change our relationship with stuff. And that's why marketing is right at the very heart of this, and why I, as an old technologist, are learning new skills every day about how to engage going forward. So delighted to be with you today.
Thank you very much, Mike. And Dhruv.
Great. Thank you, Louise, and thank you, Marketing Kind, for the invite. And I'm super privileged to be here on stage with Orit and Mike to share this 1.5 hour with you all. So basically, everyone, I am a plastic pollution campaigner. So if you don't find me running hackathons or helping startups solving the world's biggest problems, you will find me on the rivers collecting plastic waste and things like that. So I've done that a lot. I've reached around 300 million people doing collecting plastic from the waterways across the world. And now my mission is to convert those 300 million people to 300 million million tons of plastic and carbon from the economy. And I believe that innovation and startups is the only way to get there. And I'm here, to help startups in this space to solve the challenges we face for common good.
Thank you very much, Dhruv. And I don't want to dwell too long on articulating the problem, and get more quickly into sort of constructive solution orientation discussion. But just to contextualize discussion, can we talk briefly about what we think the biggest bottlenecks to tackling climate change are? So Mike's talked about the fundamental problem of consumption. Are there any other major bottlenecks you see to us as a society, to business within that, to driving the change that's needed? Dhruv, you're nodding. What do you think?
Nodding, no. But thank you for volunteering me. Yeah, I mean, I think from a business perspective, our biggest bottleneck I see right now is that we have got all the solutions we need. So Elon Musk has recently put $100 million prize for the best solution to capture carbon. The thing is that we already have those solutions in place. The lack we have is the lack of will for a mass scale rollout of all these solutions at scale. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges why we're unable to adopt and deploy these solutions that you already have, and obviously you do the R&D in parallel, but the biggest challenge is rollout, mass scale rollout. I think is big for me.
Brilliant, thank you. Mike, you touched on consumption originally. Is there anything that you would like to add to that regarding what you see the biggest bottlenecks to tackling climate change as being?
Well, just three very, very brief points. I mean, just to reiterate the point about scale. We forget how big the global economy is. So I worked for a small retailer, turning over £10 billion a year, selling 3 billion items a year from a couple of thousand factories, 20,000 farmers, thousands of raw material sources, cotton fields, fisheries, palm oil plantations, soya, cocoa, etc. The other direction, 32 million people buying and using those products, taking the packaging off, deciding to keep them for a long time or not. Walmart is 25 times bigger than Marks and Spencer. Do the maths. If you want to change just the production system, it's a staggering undertaking. If you want to change the engagement with hundreds of millions of people consuming your product, it's an even bigger problem. So there's a problem of numbers. That is solvable now with the fourth industrial revolution. With the digital revolution we've got, I tried to track and trace those 3 billion items using pen, paper, abacus, and spreadsheet. Grey hair for a reason. Now with artificial intelligence and big data, you can start to get your arms around this vast, staggering number of things flowing around a staggering number of locations on the planet. So that's point number one. Point number two is no one on their own is going to solve this. This is not going to be solved by marketeers or policymakers or NGOs or entrepreneurs like Musk. It's about all of us working together to align the different levers that need to be pulled in tandem to drive change. And having said all that, there is a point here about how we consume. We have to make the alternative feel desirable to people, not cost them more, that perceive the green option as costing them more. It has to feel better for them. And the businesses that are succeeding now, we talk about the Teslas, the Oatleys, the Qualms of this world, are selling something to people that they actually want to consume, full stop. Great performing car, looks great, great tasting food, interesting, but also meets their expectation on quality, on price and aspiration as well. So they're the three great challenges I think we've got going forward.
Brilliant, thank you. And if we think about the scale of the challenge, it triggers me to think about the systems change. And Orit, I wonder if that strikes a chord for you in thinking about the role of marketing within the system, within various systems, and how we understand how we can best affect change in that scale, in that complexity.
So I think that there's a great kind of contradiction when you think about systems, because you think you need to change the whole system, but actually there is no such thing. I mean, no one operates at the systemic level. It's all about the accumulation of so many small decisions. And I think this is where we need a different mindset in terms of understanding that actually your small choices, your small tinkering within the system has huge incremental effects. And it is about getting people to understand the leverages they have around them in order to make those small changes, and to understand that these synchronize across the system. So, like Mike just said, you have these huge scale of systems of production, and you think, well, am I really going to take that on? Do I need to build a roadmap and a blueprint for all of that? Well, no. Within each sphere at every local level, you actually have an autonomy to make certain decisions that will contribute to it. And if you have the right conversation going on, then you have the synchronization. And I think that the last element I would add to that is that you need to have this shift from sacrifice to aspiration. Mm-hmm. So this understanding that this is something that can be aspirational and a positive shift that will actually make your life better, rather than, the old thinking of we need to sacrifice now for a better future. So I think that there's a lot to be done within that space, and marketers as the storytellers have this amazing opportunity both to impact within their organization and actually convince the organization that they work for that, hey, this can be done, and this is what your customers will value. And of course, showing how the tinkering and the gradual improvements that companies do tell that story to their customers, so they would appreciate it more and create that positive dynamic effect.
Yes. So there's something in the sort of the tinkering, the making small scale experiments that can create the evidence to sort of snowball the change. I can imagine in that. I'm really interested in this point about how we see the role of marketeers, and where many of us here are marketeers in some capacity. What is the role that you see marketeers as best playing in helping businesses tackle climate change? And so, Orit, you talked about storytelling, and you talked about changing the narrative from sacrifice to aspiration. Dhruv, what do you see as being the role of marketeers in addressing climate change, and perhaps how we might need to think differently about our purpose and our role versus what we've historically seen it as being?
As Mike was telling as well, and also Orit was telling, two things that stood up was obviously SDG 12, that's the consumption and the consumer consumption that we have to address, and also tinkering. So to address the big challenge of consumption, we have to start tinkering. And I have a huge tech background, and in the tech world, we use something called the minimum viable product, MVP approach. So in MVP approach, we look for we try a little prototype, very little prototype, and we learn, we iterate, we learn and iterate. So I think we can't go and solve the whole, as Orit said, the whole system at the same time, but we have to take an MVP approach, or a minimum viable marketing campaign, or MVM or something like that, where you can start playing the first iteration, and then we can see how we can start tinkering bit by bit. You put it out there, learn and get the response from the consumers, and then tinker it based on the feedback and start becoming bigger and bigger. And yeah, so marketing is at the heart of it, but I think some of the campaigns can be improved, I believe, by tinkering and consumption to deal with the consumption challenges. Yeah, MVM approach, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, MVM. I love that. And I think that the way of thinking, that way of working, can help us break through this horrible sense of it's too big, it's too complex, which we were sort of starting to get a feeling around when we were talking a minute ago. What challenges are there to marketing thinking differently about its role in seizing the opportunity to drive change? And perhaps Mike, you've got some thoughts from your extensive experience in the corporate world here. I'm really curious to hear your take on what barriers there are to marketing really making this change.
So two thoughts. I mean, one is over Christmas, because I'm a bit of a geek and I've got 3 teenagers who were busy revising for exams. I read 160 citizen surveys from around the world on perceptions on sustainability issues, including climate change. And they all told me the same consistent thing. Firstly, that 70% of people, typically in every marketplace, are worried about climate change. So even in a very splintered conversation that you've got in the United States at the moment, 81% of people are concerned about climate change, to a large extent or a somewhat extent. Now, there's a very loud, very noisy, fairly substantial minority, 20%, who absolutely don't believe in it. But there's 81% who do. So it's a willingness to look beyond some of the noise and spot the underlying signal coming from the marketplace. The second thing that I took from all that research was people now are not happy about incrementalism. This sense of build back better post-pandemic. The vast majority of people want us to put a more sustainable future at the heart of whatever regrowth or rebirth plans we have to take a bombed out economy forward after the pandemic. And the third thing was the consistency of the number of people who want to shop at a tactical level more sustainably too. The electric car, less packaging, different diet, but all of them saying, but it feels hard. You know, you're either making it expensive, you're making it difficult, you're making it feel a bit yuck. These are all things that have got to be overcome. So that's point number one. The research out there tells me, the old Henry Fordism, if I'd listened to my customers, I'd have given them a faster horse. People are saying we want change, but we just don't know exactly what it looks like. You as business have got to interpret that. So I want marketers to be much more brave in interpreting that signal from the consumer. The second thing is, going back to the production consumption thing, businesses consistently get it wrong aligning the two. So everything I've learned in business says there are 3 fundamental boardroom questions when it comes to a sustainable future. The why, the what, the how. Why do I need to become sustainable? Because the marketplace is demanding it, as I've just said. But what is the engine, and what do I commit to do in terms of net zero, or human rights, or water, or packaging? Businesses love that. They come up with numbers, write them down. Not a lot happens, but they write them down. Where business always fails is on how do I integrate all of the above into my big busy business, engage my customer, my colleague, my shareholder, my suppliers, which is the human emotional side. So as much as we talk about marketing here as end at the end consumer, actually I'm talking about engagement. How do you engage human beings in the need to change, the pathway to change, and the benefits of change? And if we can overcome that mentality, we win as well. So two quick points.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm interested in how we think about what we might need to let go of, or what we might need to trade off in order to make that change. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you can see that we need to be prepared to trade off as marketeers. So we may think about, from the consumer perspective, let's shift it from, I hate the word consumer, I'm using it in inverted commas, shift from sacrifice to aspiration. If we think about marketeers and our role and how we work, is there anything we need to be prepared to step away from, to trade off, to sacrifice? Orit, yes, you're nodding. Is there anything that you have in mind there?
I would say let go of market research. As someone who has worked in market research, and I'm saying that because again, it goes back to more conventional ideas, because whoever you are asking will only be able to tell you about the products that they're enjoying right now and the things that they might think that they can change, you know, in the margins. But if you let go of that and just believe and understand that there is research that overall says that, you know, the public does want to see significant change. Just take that on board and take much more risk. But that also means that from an organizational perspective, both within marketing teams and within business in general, there should be much more tolerance for failure. So just like Dhruv said, you know, you need to do a lot of iterations and you need to do a lot of trial and error. And that basically means that you need to fail a lot and you'll come up with a lot of ideas that will be utterly rubbish. And there needs to be a space for that. So it's not about move fast and break things, but it's rather move fast and do a lot of mini iterations and do a lot of mini experiments, and whatever, you know, seems to create the right energy around it, then scale those ones up. So I think that, again, it is in terms of the autonomy that they give themselves and that they're being given by their organizations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, so I spend quite a lot of time doing what we might call market research, but I'm completely with you that consumers can't project into the future for us. They can only tell us how they feel now and where they have needs, wants, barriers in the here and now, and they can't project ahead. And so I'm interested in this idea of picking up signals, whether it's signals through experimenting, whether it's signals through observation. And I wondered if, Orit, from your experience, you've got any advice on how we can pick up signals as to how things are going to change.
So there are two sources. First of all, history. Certain patterns just repeat themselves. So we're coming out of a pandemic. And we know from history that societies that come out of a huge crisis have this, you know, huge exuberance and great positive energy and the kind of a sense of overcompensation. And the question is, can we harness this pattern that we know is coming, not to end up as overconsumption and binging, but actually towards real transformation. The other one is small data. We just need to be really good observers and seeing what are the new businesses that are coming up, you know, in my high street. I'm now doing a lot of research on cities and how cities are reinventing themselves. So what are the shifts that I'm beginning to see that I can start to connect the dots and say, actually, there's an interesting framework. Let's try to get more stakeholders connected along these lines.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I'm really interested in this point about sort of the exuberance of the now and learning from history in that respect. And we're in, I can't quite bring myself to say this word, but it's in my head anyway. We're in an unprecedented time. That hackneyed word. When we think about the impact of COVID and how we come out of it, over in what way and over what time frame and enduring impact. And I'm really interested in what challenges or lessons or opportunities we can see coming out of COVID-19. So Mike's touched on sort of the appetite people have for doing things fundamentally differently that we see coming through, and Orit's talked about sort of exuberance and a sort of energy for the future that we can see. Dhruv, having worked on you set up the coronavirus hackathon last year to collaborate with people around the world to generate ideas for how we can make a better world post-COVID. I'm just wondering if you in particular have any thoughts around what lessons we can learn from COVID and how we can think together, collaborate together to find opportunities in this time.
Yeah, we did run the hackathon. So there is the BC before COVID and AC after COVID time. So we're still in a transition period. And we ran the COVID hackathon and based on three principles. And that actually became quite interesting for me personally. Today, in a post-COVID world, we have all moved to Zoom and online and found new ways of collaboration. So it has become much more easier to include diversity in the conversation. So initially, the diversity was just in a geographically dependent and things like that, and also cross-pollination. That diversity not just in terms of gender or color, but also in terms of skill set, the generation, nationality. So we can actually bring everyone together in this new way of working, and people are more than willing to spend some time and do it. and also obviously open innovation as well. For example, with the 3D printing of the ventilators and how it became an emergency and people spinning up all over the world trying to share files and printing. So you can see how collaboration went to a whole new level to respond to a common challenge like COVID-19. And obviously climate is a common challenge, and the thing is it's not visible yet, or it's not impacting us. So it's a lot of opportunities post-COVID. We learned a lot around global collaboration, bringing in open innovation, diversity, and cross-pollination to the table. And and everyone wants to do good. That's the thing, everyone wants to do good. They only need the opportunities and the right network and the environment to really solve the problem. And I think this new era is super exciting in a post-COVID world. And with the finance teams laughing because they don't have to pay for those expensive office space anymore. The travel expenses are disappearing already, right? And now all this extra budget they have lying around, what can we do? Where can we invest in this extra money in better communicating with the customers, what we have been doing in the period, and engaging more the community and giving back to the community in these tough times. So really inspired to see many brands doing that as well, giving back from all the profits they have been making in the pandemic.
I think this idea of the digital transformation journey that we're on and how COVID has accelerated that in some ways it provides an interesting thought starter and how that can create opportunities for collaboration and diverse perspectives to come together. I'm interested now to get your thoughts on what you think the role of marketeers is in a world where we are perhaps, let's say, taking climate change more seriously. I can pick up some clues as to what you might think on this based on our earlier conversation, but for all of those of us who might see ourselves as marketeers in this virtual room, what do you think is the purpose of marketing, of marketeers going forward, or what does it need to be? What's the point of marketing in a world where we're trying to create a climate for change? Mike, perhaps you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah, and just a quick thought, because I think clearly that there is a really big discussion now at a corporate level about purpose. So what is it where you're that perfect Venn diagram where you're looking for that you can provide a solution for the individual citizen, what they consume from you, and a solution to a societal problem. And businesses like Unilever do a tremendously good job at finding that sort of that duality. Clearly that then trickles down to marketing teams and marketing individuals. And the ability to be a solution provider, I think we talked about Dhruv being a solution provider, is what it's all about. And I think what I'm challenging you to is move away from the paradigm, the 40-year paradigm of capitalism that we've lived in 1980 to 2020, where within reason, we all felt we were very innovative, but we're all just on the same train track of overconsumption. Now I'm asking you to be creative as individuals to solve challenges for your immediate consuming person that you're selling to, but be really clear with them about how, if they consume that product, the difference that they're making with it, and not in a grudging, dull way that either technologists might do, but in an exciting way. That's what you do so very, very well. And I go back to this word engagement. I want to get away from the word marketing. I want to get to this point where you can communicate the necessity of change, the pathway to change, and the fact that if we do change, things can be better at the end of it, for you individually and for the big wide world as well. That's what you do so well.
Brilliant, thank you. And just for reference for everyone posting comments in the Q&A, they're not being ignored. I can see them mounting up. We will come back to them. So there's a window where we'll address all your questions. So please do keep them coming. I'm seeing there's some really interesting questions coming through, and I'll look forward to putting them to the panel shortly. So then where can we learn from? Where can we draw inspiration from as marketeers? It could be from all sorts of different sources. It could be individuals. It could be challenger brands. It could be new business models you see coming through. I'm just really interested in where you think we can learn and draw inspiration from. Are there any interesting brands, people, business models that you see that can help us think differently as we look to create this climate for change? Dhruv, I think you're nodding if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
inspiring you.
I mean, I'm really inspired by Brewdog and James and the way they're leading their campaigns, and just a simple example of buying their own forest instead of going for a carbon credit scheme that EasyJet or other brands are trying to do, or every brand is trying to sort that in accounting terms, but no one knows how accountable they are. But the fact that they're going and buying their own forest is super interesting. But just a thought for every marketeer, I believe here is that, in the technology business or product design these days, we're all talking about biomimicry. How can we learn from Mother Nature to really solve some of our problems? And also a bit of synthetic biology. How can we take the tree that captures carbon already, but can we make it much more efficient in capturing carbon, or the algae that we have today? So in the world of marketing, I wonder what inspiration we can take from Mother Nature and implement that in the marketing campaigns. I don't know the answer, but that is something I would be curious to explore one day. For now,
yeah, really interesting. In terms of product design, you can see all sorts of opportunities there and ways of working even. Orit, do you have any thoughts on where we can draw inspiration?
So I think there are a couple of really interesting ones. First of all, what Dhruv mentioned earlier in terms of open source, how open source is actually changing different industries and changing business models. That allows many different players to use the same technology in a new way. I'm hoping that, for example, lab-grown meat at some point will be open source rather than something that is controlled by a few corporations and we could all, grow our own steaks or whatever. But it's really important in terms of these new emerging industries that are green industries to see what is the structure that they're going to follow. But then, of course, there is this whole thing about product as a service. If we want people to continue to use products for a much longer time, then the idea of actually looking at it as a service is an interesting one. The whole reselling, which I think, especially over 2020, especially in fashion, has become very, very popular, is another interesting model to look at. And also new businesses that are coming to the high street, for example, refilling shops. So you will have these little shops, on every high street that you will come and refill your soaps and whatever. And around that, there will be a coffee shop and a concept shop. So you see all of these new experiments coming up around us. And I think that there's so much to learn from as signals.
Thank you very much. And Mike, I think we've touched on a few examples that I know that you find inspiring. So lab-grown meat, brands like Impossible Burger, reselling platforms. Is there anything you'd add in terms of where you draw inspiration from a sort of brand point of view or a technology sector point of view?
See, I think, or mentioned this already, the resale platforms in clothing are really interesting to me. Because we've already seen the great sustainability transition happen in power behind the scenes, the shift from coal to wind and solar. And wind and solar are now outperforming coal, not just environmental criteria, but economic. The car industry stumbled belatedly into the fact that the great transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle. And half of them have been so late in doing it, they're going to go bust in the next decade trying to keep up with Tesla. We're now entering a new wave of disruption, which are fundamentally destroying the business models of incumbents. So it's happening in fashion, and it's interesting, fashion's been pulled in two directions: ever faster fashion, bad, and this much more considered approach to, do I need to buy? If I do buy it, I'll wear it at least 30 times. Once I finish with it, I resell it on the platforms. And the resale platforms, I think, are a really interesting indicator of what sustainability looks like. Very few of them set out to be a sustainability business model. They're fundamentally about growing the marketplace, consumers to extract more value from clothing that they'll finish with and selling on, and in doing so become very rich themselves. A number of them are smaller ones, absolutely have sustainability at the heart, but by and large, a lot of the business models were just economic. But that's why they become scale models. As soon as you start out just to be sustainable, there's a slight risk that you alienate a vast majority of the marketplace. And I believe that at heart, 35% of the marketplace is light green. The consumers that want it and carry on living a good life, but they want it to be easy for them. They want it to be something that they can engage with. There's only 10% of people who are deeply, deeply, deeply green. So working with that 35% to a light green is incredibly important going forward. So I draw inspiration now from that wave of disruption. And the final point is on the food system. The food system is broken. no one contributes more to the climate crisis. Nobody's going to suffer more from it. And I see now all these startups starting to emerge in the world of food, fundamentally disrupting it. Now is not the time. I'll talk about it a little later about the personalization of food and how it's going to disrupt the marketplace and sustainability. But we'll come back to that one.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm interested now to talk about what challenges marketing faces in driving change within its organizations. In one of our previous gatherings, we talked about how CMOs have typically the shortest tenure in the C-suite. So that's potentially one barrier. I'm interested in any other thoughts that you might have on challenges that marketeers might face. Let's say they have the passion, they see the opportunity for change, they see the need for change, but do they face any major barriers that you think are worth unpicking for a moment in making that change within their organizations and then outside of their organizations? What do you think? Mike, perhaps you've got some thoughts on this, thinking about your experience in M&S and working with a range of corporates.
Yeah, and I think, marketing is a tough gig. You're the first that gets the blame if sales are bad, and you rarely get all the credit if sales go well. I mean, that's just the history of marketing, isn't it? I think marketeers have found it really hard to engage with this at a mainstream level. I'm not talking about the audience we've got on here, because it's been perceived so strongly in people's minds that it's hard to sell. I'm trying to sell a product that costs more or looks worse or performs worse. It's just pushing water up a hill in a difficult life as it is. And the second thing is more philosophical. It's the big discussion that we're all excited about, which is consumption over consumption. And they're thinking quite the opposite. I want to sell more. I'm rewarded. My career is based on flogging more stuff. So being able to find a braver set of marketing leaders, and people like Keith Weed at Unilever, I think, exemplified and showed how you could be a successful leader of a very public business, but who fused together the challenge of stuff and sustainability as well. And Unilever are on the journey, they're by no means perfect. And I know that Keith's action inspired many other fence-sitting CMOs who were sat there thinking, maybe I shouldn't, to join in the journey. And having those role models across the industry is critically important.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm interested now to touch on what skills marketeers need to drive change. So to create this climate for change, what skills do we need to think about adapting, learning, honing for the future? And perhaps it's different ways of looking at things, perhaps it's different ways of working. Interested in your thoughts here, Orit, on what skills we need to be considering to be marketeers for this future world.
I think it's very important to have the skill to get a sense of the dynamics, both within your own organization and of course outside. And I think that marketers are always, in the mindset of understanding where the market is going. But actually, when it comes to climate change, so much of it is also working on the inside, because at the end of the day, they're not the decision makers in terms of the product design or the packaging or the supply chain or all of that. So they need to be able to almost be diplomats that create like second track, in peace building, we have second track processes. In a way, you need to be able to build that in your own organization, to create those safe spaces where you can call in the engineers and the designers and play around with ideas without having them to commit yet to actually, implementing them. And I think that this is a role that marketers can play in a very interesting and kind of subversive yet productive way.
I love that idea of the combination of subversion and productivity. Any other thoughts on the skills that marketeers are going to need increasingly going forward? What about you, Dhruv? Do you have any perspectives on this?
Data, I believe, I'm sure everyone is on top of the data, but also it's very interesting with small data that Orit was talking about, not just the big data. And also to be up to speed, to also observe trends. For example, now Clubhouse is getting quite popular and it's going viral across Europe, and everyone is on Clubhouse and talking about all kinds of stuff. That's a very interesting tool to really use, but it also highlighted me that how small the world is, and you can actually engage with a lot of VCs and a lot of investors and a lot of experts from around the world, especially in the early stages, to really learn. So these are I think the tools will really help anyone to know what's happening around the world. I believe to be on top of the game and learn all these tools and see as well what tools are being used. So to be on top of data and the tools and the technologies. Don't forget biology and synthetic biology. That is something very interesting, and a lot of things are happening. The sad news is that most of them are happening in the lab space and in the academia. So we don't get to know, but once you get to know the solutions, you will never leave them alone. They're so incredible. Yeah.
And Louise, just to add some good points there. When I was at M&S, we started off as, there was a technical team and there was an engagement team. So whether that was out and out marketing or PR or internal comms, with time we became a fused team. And even though I was the technical guy and somebody else was the marketing person, actually we learned about each other's jobs and respected. So whereas in the past I would initially go with the deadly dull, boring stories to the marketing team and they'd say, no way, Mike, can't tell that story. I had to learn that. Equally, the marketing team had to learn what a credible story was. So they'd go, Mike, oh, we want to tell this wonderful story of it. Guys, it's greenwash. You can't say that. It's just pushing the boundaries of what we can say. That's where we started. With time, we became one slick machine that understood. So I would challenge anybody on this phone who's come from an out-and-out marketing background or engagement marketing, understand a little bit more about the science, but also help your technical colleagues understand a little bit more about engagement as well. Yeah. That's what we want, is people who are comfortable on the intersect.
That's what I've seen, Mike, as well, in those amazing PhD researchers who are unable to communicate their story, and that's where the gap is. So you're talking from a corporate side, but I'm talking from an innovation side, and that's where the gap is. They're like, we have this amazing product, but they can't sell the story, and they're like, just don't know why no one is buying, getting convinced of the story. And here we are, all the marketeers to tell the story. So yeah.
And just one last question before we bring in Marie from Nuremberg World, and then we'll come back to Q&A. I mean, we've touched on this issue throughout the discussion about the need to think about engagement, not necessarily marketing, about the need to think about how we can leverage better our storytelling skills. And simplistically put, marketing creates the connections between business and the consumer or the customer. How can marketing best bring consumers along with it? How can it best bridge that corporate strategy down to its target audience? And is there anything we need to think about differently in order to make that happen, to bring people along the journey with us? Mike?
Just a very quick thought, and full disclosure, I work with these guys, something called Kogo, and it's an app that enables people to follow how much they're spending on a daily basis through open banking protocols on good choices, or sustainable, or less good ones. And if it's a less good one, here are nudges as to alternatives to your current provider. And then at the end of the month, this is the difference you made in terms of carbon, or supporting people with a living wage, or avoiding plastics or food waste, the difference you're making. And there are other ones out there. Kogo's just the one that I work with. But what they're doing is they're starting to engage people in the difference that they're making through each individual purchasing decision that they're making. And again, it's about using fintech, it's about using digital technology, it's about using open banking protocols to really start to engage people, rather than sort of leave it this fuzzy sense of, yeah, there's a problem, something needs to be done by somebody else. Makes it real and relevant to you as well.
I think one more thing is also for me is co-creation and A/B testing. So what you can do is you can create a bunch of users or co-create a product with a user or a campaign, and you just put it out there like a landing page. That's it, just a website, no product, but to test the demand in the market or to test what language is working on it. I'm sure most of you are working on that, but that's a good way to engage with the consumers and bring them to do a product with you, or highlight some emerging products or emerging manufacturers or brands and work with them. I think you can use the mini influencers as well across them, and yeah, so a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think that speaks very nicely back to Orit's thinking around micro experiments, around breaking down the challenge in trying trying different things and accumulating the change through all the different experiments that you make. And while there's a need, as you said, Orit, to build a tolerance for failure, actually through some of those kinds of approaches, you can perhaps de-risk those experiments, I guess, as well. Brilliant. So I'm going to bring in Marie from Renewable World now, and then we'll hear from Marie on Renewable World for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to working through all of your questions. So Marie, over to you.
Great, thank you. Yes, my name's Marie Hounslow. I'm the Head of Fundraising and Communications for Renewable World. My background is in poverty and the environment and the connection between them, and then seeing how renewable energy plays into helping the situation with climate change. And it's nice to be here with Mike, who's a sort of fellow, an ambassador for WWF, where I was for 16 years. But I've been with Renewable World now for 7 years. It's been an amazing journey. Renewable World was born out of the renewable energy industry in the UK, and by next year we will have helped at least 100,000 people through the power of renewable energy, and this is in places like Nepal, Kenya, Nicaragua, Bangladesh. And these are really deep transformations, but at an everyday level, it's hours saved fetching and carrying water through solar water pumping, or it's money earned by being connected to a solar microgrid, or it's education improved for children in remote villages through lighting at home when it's dark. So we have many corporate partners that help us on our journey, and I have to say, hand on heart, it's the best fun part of my role as a fundraiser and as a communicator. And I would like more help to help us achieve our goal. We've got a small and mighty team based in Brighton, although I'm in Godalming at the moment, and we have our Nepal team and also a very small team in Nairobi. So what I would like to do is to bring on more corporate partners to Renewable World without breaking this amazing team that we have. And we've done a good job to date reactively, especially with the renewable energy industry. But now I feel like we're in a position where we can reach out proactively. So the session that we're going to do is on how can we bring on those corporate partners, or indeed any partners, to Renewable World efficiently and effectively. How can we grow the partnerships that we have now, and how can we entice new people to our Renewable World journey? And how do we do this in the context of a global pandemic and the ever urgent and active call to tackle climate change? So we've got some great corporate partners at the moment, and I'm sure that the community that we've got here have their own experiences, good and bad, hopefully mostly good. So I'd like to learn from that as well. And it was really interesting listening to the recent session that you had on that. So would really love it if you could join us. When is the session, Anna? It's on the 22nd, I believe. But information will be sent out 26th of February. Thank you. I had a complete blank there. And I just want to pick up on what was said in the sessions, that the bit that I love the most is the real engagement that we get, and the fact that the corporate partners that come on at the beginning, we always stress that it is a journey, and it all sounds a bit cliched and a bit corny. But where we start with our corporate partners and where we finish is completely unexpected and delightful mostly. And sometimes it's a bit of a pain, but mostly it's just amazing and beneficial both to us as a charity and hopefully to our partners as well. So I'm really hoping that you can join me and help me on this.
Thank you very much, Marie. So now we're going to go to the questions that have been piling up. I'm going to go to a question from Mark. He was asking about the fact that there's a tendency towards jumping up to jump towards talking about packaged goods. And there I do see this from speaking with in inverted commas consumers, that it's relatively easy to intuit how you might be having an impact on the environment through the purchase choices you're making. When it comes to the service sector, it's much harder for people to understand the impact that they may be having in choosing this financial services brand or that other services telecoms brand, let's say. So from a B2C perspective, what's the role of service brands in this conversation? What role? How can they make themselves relevant in this conversation? And Mike, because you were answering this initially, I've realised that you've been marvellously multitasking and answering a few questions on the chat already. I'm just interested to know if you've got any particular perspectives on what's the role of the service sector in all of this.
Yeah, and I'm seeing more and more service providers now, not just committing to reduce their own impacts, which is, a bit of travel, lessens the current climate, a bit of paper, a bit of IT, nothing like the footprint for Marks and Spencer, or Coke, or a Walmart. But in practice, their true footprint is what they advise their clients on. So I've seen people like Dentsu when it comes to advertising, PwC when it comes to management consultancy, WSP when it comes to civil engineering, commit to advise all their clients, whether they ask for it or not, on the fact that there's a sustainable future that they need to be taken into account. Now, I guess the proof will be in the pudding. Which dollar will these businesses, service providers ultimately refuse to accept because they run a risk of greenwashing or protecting a big business that really doesn't want to do this? But I think now there's an expectation and scrutiny of these service providers. And the second part of it, for the service providers, they're recognizing there's a huge marketplace out there. For all the questions that we've sat here wondering about here, somebody's going to pay PwC to work out for £1 million whether they should become an electric car company in 5 years' time or 3 years' time. Dentsu will be paid by people who want to bring to life their plant-based diet. So anybody who's refusing to respond to this won't have a service to provide them in their future as well.
Great, thank you very much. And then we've got a question around COP26, and that's something I wanted to come to earlier, and we didn't manage to get to it yet, so I'm glad a question was asked about this. To what extent do you, the panelists, think that COP26 is a relevant moment to engage customers or prospective customers? And if you were in charge of marketing and looking to boost your environmental story, would you plan around it or steer away from it? What do you think? And perhaps the bigger question there around what we think the potential impact of COP26 may be, and then what do we think this could mean for marketeers, or should mean for marketeers? Orit, any thoughts about the potential impact of COP26?
Well, I think it's just a wonderful gravitational pull for any attention. So this is what, this is where the discourse is going to be. This is what everyone will be trying to promote themselves on. And this is also where you can call out, different decision makers, just taking this week's story about the new coal mine. Comes to mind. It's all about where the story lies, and I think it creates great opportunities. And what I'm hoping is that marketers will not just go to tell the story about their own industry and their own product and with a bit of potential greenwashing, but will actually take this advantage for collaboration across sectors. And I think that this is really where the potential lies.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. I'm interested in that collaboration point, actually. Mike, you're going to say something.
Very, very quickly, I think the optics for COP26 look very positive now. You've got China, Japan, South Korea, European Union, UK, and soon the Americans making net zero commitments, which is great. I think we've got more and more corporates coming out. But again, to Orit's point, I would absolutely say that the thing that businesses need to be thinking about is partnership. And the Race to Zero platform that Nigel Topping's built that allows sectors to come together. No point turning up at COP26 as an individual company. You're just going to get lost unless you're one of the few mega businesses on the planet. But if you are part of a sector that wants to communicate that you collectively want change, and I've seen it from UK Farming, the NFU, UK Retail, the British Retail Consortium, the World Cement Association, the World Steel Association, wherever I look, businesses are huddling together because the shift from being slightly less bad to fundamentally sustainable is not something that is to be done lightly or on your own. A big challenge for the retailers is getting everybody to use the same decarbonise heavy goods vehicles. Is that electric? Is it biofuels? Is it hydrogen? No point 3 different retailers doing 3 different things. You need one collective approach. So COP26 is incredibly important, but turn up there in a collective, not as an individual.
Brilliant, thank you. You're nodding, Dhruv.
Yeah, I think we're super lucky, because if we had COP26 last year as planned, we would have had a different outcome. But with the new administration in the US and our energy behind it right now, we are under a lot of pressure, especially Boris Johnson here to deliver, and also with Brexit and need to find a new export business for the UK industry as well. I think a lot of things are going to happen with COP26, and collaboration is what they're all encouraging, and action as well, getting things done rather than talking about it. I think that's what is the focus of the whole thing. So I think we're super. I'm personally excited, and people should all join and apply to the different pavilions they can be a part of. Maybe Marketing Kind can have one if you have put something together, and how can you give back? So yeah.
Thank you. So now there's an interesting question about B Corps and the growing B economy movement. And I'm really interested in the panel's perspectives on B Corps. So I think we're the fastest growing country in the world for adoption of B Corp status. And I'm interested in your perspectives on the value and meaning of B Corp in signalling sort of seriousness on climate change and sort of transparency, trustworthiness around actions on climate change. Mike, you're nodding.
I love them. I think B Corp is brilliant, because what it does, it goes beyond this incrementalism of, I'm going to run my business in the same old way, but I'm going to have an energy reduction target over there and a bit of a plastics target over here. It goes to the very heart and essence of why you exist as a business. How do you create wealth and how do you share wealth? And I'm a little bit concerned at the moment that we've got a slight over-focus on environmental net zero. We're utterly forgetting social sustainability. So when I look at social sustainability, don't kill someone building site, no kids in factories, don't make sure your food doesn't poison anybody. There's no ambition there to create a better society. And what the pandemic has shown is desperately, people want a better life for them, their kids, their families, those around them. If you look at issues to do with, do you pay taxes? How do you handle data? How do you pay dividends? Where you domicile in terms of tax? Silence from many in business. And I think what the B Corp movement done is putting these big socioeconomic issues on the table. And it's giving consumers, citizens, a shorthand to say, I'm a B Corp business. Just shop with me. You don't have to look at all the detail, because the B Corp team have analysed my data and said, I'm the right place to be. So I love them.
Now, there's a sort of question within a statement from Debbie, which is around the role of marketing in helping shift people's mindsets from the actions I take don't make a difference in the grand scheme of things. So I do my bit. I avoid taking plastic bags at the supermarket. I recycle. But what difference does that really make? To the actions that I take are worth taking, and they ladder up to a bigger picture positive impact. And I'm just curious as to whether there's anything that marketeers can do better to help people feel like their individual actions are worth taking, that they make a difference. And I'm wondering, Orit, if there's any learnings from thinking about systemic thinking and your practices on social acupuncture to help people feel like the little things ladder up, they do make a difference.
So I think there are 2 really important elements here. First of all, in terms of how marketing actually reflects the amplification of those actions and actually showing what they add up into. But also there is something else that Dhruv mentioned earlier, which is all about co-creation. If you allow these actions to actually also help redesign the processes, redesign the services, redesign the product as a feedback, where they actually learn, there's a feedback action between the business and their customers, then you can gradually build that forward. So that's really important.
Yeah, one more thing here is, depends on what that little action is. Is it I'm avoiding my plastic bag, or is it I'm angel investing in a sustainable startup, right? So if I'm angel investing, say for example, in a battery technology startup, I put 5K or something, that's impact. And you can build your own portfolio of angel investments, either in crowdfunding platforms or making direct angel investments. And then you can be an early adopter and recommend, you know, it's not just your own action, but you're building the community for them, because the more people buy, the more we are closer to solving these problems. So depending on the little actions. So I would encourage people to go beyond just thinking what they can do, signing a petition, but take real actions and really help the founders, get involved with them, like Marketing Kind is trying to do, help give your time and skill set to really help them scale. So that's when you have the real impact, for sure. So go beyond what you're thinking you're doing. It's a lot of things to be done, and I think they all need their help for scale.
And Dhruv, I mean, just to concur, I think we talked a little bit earlier about, is there a difference across the generations in terms of interest in sustainability? And what I'm seeing is, in terms of concern, there isn't. In terms of willingness to act upon that and do the right thing, there is. Your generation is much more amenable than mine to actually make the meaningful changes, as opposed to just avoid a plastic bag down the supermarket today. And that's what we've got to show people, is that they can not only make a big difference through using their money, they can also get a good reward. And I don't want to see a sustainable future based upon a few billionaires who've got lucky or backed the right thing at the right time, and everybody else is still working in servitude in a gig economy. A true sustainable economy is sharing, again, the B Corp point, the economic upside of a shift, and not leaving it dominant in a few people's hands. Even if they're green car producers, are they paying the taxes? Are they supporting the health service and everything else that we depend upon? So great point. If
I can add just one point to that, which also links up with what you said, Mike, about B Corps. I think that, you know, when I look at other startups, because I've been very much involved in the startup scene in London over the last few years, you see startups coming with a real purposeful energy of actually solving issues. So it's very rare to meet a founder who says that I just want to make loads of money. That, you know, might be something that they also aspire to, but the essence of the startups themselves are all about problem solving. So really getting involved in that part of things, and this blurring of the old style of business thinking with purposeful businesses is something that I think is a very positive shift.
Thank you. We've got a question from Jeanette about, which I think connects well to what we've just been discussing and some of our earlier conversation points as well, around how we can better drive change, adoption of new products that are more sustainable, shift people's behaviour. How can we make those sectors that are less impactful on the environment move faster in their adoption? So it could be plant-based meat, for example, lab-grown meat. Anything else that's kind of perhaps a parallel you can think of that's an emergent sector that isn't necessarily so familiar to people today, but is potentially part of the solution. How can we accelerate the adoption of these products, of these categories that can be part of the difference? We've talked about desirability before. We've talked about making products and aspirational. I'm just interested in any other pointers you can give us in thinking about how we can push the adoption of those types of category faster. Orit, you're nodding.
I think it's about access, and how easy it becomes. So yeah, there is the aspirational element, but also, you know, how easy it is to actually, for example, resell, or how easy it is, you know, to buy used goods, or, you know, it's all about the logistics behind it, which is many times the boring part, but this is where real ingenuity could really scale things up.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because I think, and this goes back to something Mike was saying earlier on, that while there might be the appetite to do things differently, to make change in our personal lives, where it's complicated, where it's not easy, where it's hard to make those choices, where it's hard to adopt those new behaviours, and we can quite easily find that our barriers come up. So the logistics, the ease of access, the ease of adoption, I think are really critical there. Any other thoughts, Mike? You're nodding on this point.
Just at the other extreme, because I think engaging people, and I'm particularly interested in how we engage people around their interest groups. There's a real risk that we talk to people on a world basis. And I'm struck, you know, all the research around Brexit and why it happened. And, you know, one of the things that stuck with me is, you know, 25% of people, possibly like a lot of us, are from anywhere. We'll have a conversation with anybody about anything in the world. And 75% of people are grounded in somewhere. You know, born in my hometown, born in Bradford, live in Bradford, die in Bradford. What's everybody doing for Bradford? And I think we've got to have more conversations at a more granular local family town level, or around the football club. You're all Manchester United fans, or you all worship at a Catholic church or a Jewish synagogue, or you're all members of the WI. We've got to work with the grain of people's lives. At the other extreme, more technocratic, we've got to put a price on carbon. So many of today's so-called cheap products, I keep buying because they are cheap on the surface, because they're getting a freebie from society and the planet. And until we penalise the bad guys, they're always going to look cheaper. And that's what we've got to sort out. So it's the two ends of it. It's engagement and policy working together.
Brilliant. And Orit, what do you think about this kind of bringing it closer to home piece? Because I know that with your tech startup, you've got a sort of you've got an urban angle. We've been talking about bringing the big, the complex, the overly messy into small scale experiments, small scale change. What do you think about this idea of taking what feels perhaps really huge and global, and perhaps at a remove if we think about symbols of climate change such as forest fires in California and Australia, and bringing it closer to home?
So there are two elements here. One relating to what Mike just said, which is all about social physics. People tend to be really influenced by what they see around them. So this is really important. And of course, if you live in a small community at the local level, if you're able to better observe people around you, then you will be more likely to be influenced by them. And what is very interesting, and I think that cities are actually part of the solution, because you can scale up solutions to such a great extent in cities. And what we also see is that cities have been a great political solution, because while at the national level you might have had, you know, very unfavorable conditions for real change, you saw at the city level, at the mayor's level, a lot more initiatives that actually cut through the noise and create collaborations. And also when people experience also the harsh effects of climate change, you mentioned fires, they're much more likely to get together at the local level to actually create solutions without, you know, having to deal with the big political worldviews. So there's much more potential for real practical collaboration at that level. And the last thing I would mention here is that actually through COVID, we've seen this really interesting shift of hyperlocalization, where you suddenly, you know, you live in London and you actually know your neighbors, and you have all of these local initiatives and community initiatives. And I think that these are the grassroots that will enable us to also create great, you know, potential for, you know, sharing stuff and coming together to create local solutions also on the business side.
Brilliant, thank you.
Louise, can I just add one
yes,
quick point?
go for it.
Because I alluded to briefly the great disruption of the food industry, certainly in the marketplace, is personalisation. So the four of us on this conversation, we might walk into Marks and Spencer and buy the same ready meal today. But in practice, one of us needs selenium in our diet, one needs potassium, somebody else needs sodium. So what we'll end up with by the end of the decade, accelerated by COVID, is the personalisation of diet around medical and wellbeing need. Now, that brings all kinds of questions about corporate control, which is a discussion for another day. One of the things it will bring positively, though, is as soon as I know that food has been uniquely made for me, I care more where it came from. When it's just one of hundreds of thousands of amorphous chickens out there, who cares? When it's mine, that's produced for me, where's it come from? What standards it's been produced in? So being able to work with these grains of localization, personalization, digitization is critically important, and none of them are without consequence or risk, but they are direction of travel of society and the economy. Work with them.
And if I could just add to that, the psychology of co-creation, when you're part of the creation of something for yourself, you value it much more and you will be less likely to waste it or just discard of it.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's talk about the impact of COVID, and we've got a question from Jaron around the potential positive impact of COVID on the environment, or at least there's some sentiment that the impact of COVID, whatever the scientific reality behind it, in a bigger picture, more enduring sense, is there's been a positive impact. Cleaner air around us, for example, we're moving less. And of course, there's a potential positive narrative around how quickly we've adapted our ways of living to COVID. Are there any ways that you think we can help accelerate people's behaviour change through spinning positive stories off of the impact of COVID and how we've adapted and what it's meant for us? Any thoughts on this? Dhruv, you're nodding.
Yeah, it's a random idea. So yeah, there's lots of ways to help for the marketing team, especially now. For example, the hospitality industry is really struggling right now. And a lot of people are going out of business, for example. Obviously, you have the furlough scheme and everything going on there, but they need help beyond that. So how can we come up with a campaign to rally behind these businesses? Hospitality is one example, other small local businesses that are going out of business. How can we rally the local community to get behind them, and maybe a campaign around them, I think would work wonders. One of the things I think we're looking for is at checkout, for example, in Marks and Spencer online, for example, in Ocado, and checkout, if I have a drop down that can I donate my 10p to round it off, that can go to a local business, that Ocado is supporting or M&S is supporting, that will really inspire, obviously increase more sales, but also really help out in this tough times. And I think it's all about bringing everyone together and how can we contribute, working together and collaborating as consumers, the brands, and the people who need it. So yeah, one of the campaigns.
We're talking a lot about collaboration through this conversation, and we've got a couple of questions that connect to that. So one is there's a question that can spin off a statement here from Debbie. So she said, we need to move from competing for a while to collaborating. Big shifts at scale will happen when industry networks collaborate to fundamentally change their structure. Do you have any thoughts on how we need to think about collaboration across sectors with our competitors, outside of our sectors? Are there any fundamental rethinks that we need to have around how we collaborate, how we work together? Mike, you're nodding.
Well, I've got grey hair for a reason. I've spent 20 years getting all these businesses to try and work together. Trying to get Coke and Pepsi to work together was an interesting experience, but a discussion for another day. So I've learned that most businesses need to work out, of the 100% of more sustainable activity they need to do, what's the 30% they want to do distinctively, uniquely themselves and win off the back of it? And what's the 70% where you just want to share the burden of change across your industry? And, great examples from the Consumer Goods Forum where I sort of co-chaired the work there. The world's soy system, the world's palm oil system are broken. Driving deforestation, biodiversity loss. Every big food and drink company in the world's got fingers in that pie. Does Nestle and Unilever want to have a competitive position with each other? Right? No, they don't. You come together and work together on that. Front of house in the marketplace, do Marks and Spencer and Tesco's want to try and beat each other on having the best plant-based offer in the retail marketplace? Yes, they do. So it's working out where you want to compete and where you want to sort of work together is important. But my real concern here is a shifting of behavior in supply chains, a shift from this very top-down parent-child relationship between big buyers and suppliers of, jump higher. I know I'm not paying you much, but I want you to jump even higher and do this sustainability stuff. There's much more adult-to-adult conversation. And one of the best things I saw at M&S was when the food team there worked on a bronze, silver, gold ladder to help all their 700 food suppliers progressively become more sustainable. And as each of them moved in partnership up that ladder, they became more successful. They cut their operating costs, less waste, and motivated the teams and got better productivity, better innovation, better quality. So working in partnership to drive a shared outcome rather than just yelling at people to do another audit and they failed and they're going to get a bollocking, I think it's critically important. And I don't see enough of that yet.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think there's something interesting in that, in creating a vision of a shared outcome. Dhruv, Orit, do you have any thoughts on how we can better collaborate across companies, down supply chains? Any different ways that we need to think about working, engaging with each other?
I mean, for me, we run hackathons, and people come to hackathons not because they're going to meet people in the same industry, but because I'm inviting the people from the other industry. For example, the ballet dancers in the room, right? And they come because they get to see all these new perspectives, and which they lack if you are so siloed into your corporate environment. So we bring in obviously young people as well, 14-year-olds, but we also bring in obviously the board members, but also their mom and dad. In some scenarios, we've done that. So now there's a board member of a big corporation with his mom in the space and his daughter as well, and that's when you start moving the conversation from the dining room to the boardroom, where things become much more interesting. So that's the way we bring together people from different skill set, different experiences, different age groups to come and solve a common problem. And I think that's when you can come up with a lot of opportunities. So this design thinking or human-centric design. So I think at one point Mike said human-centric design. I think maybe it's too human-focused, but also maybe you can go on like a planet-centric design or climate-centric design approach. And how can you bring those new methodologies back to work? And we can, again, it's going back to the minimum viable marketing approach. You just need to play, form, run a little event and get to learn, and it's a step-by-step process. But collaboration really happens in that scenario. And I was surprised at how everyone gave up their whole day or days to do that, because no one wants to do harm knowingly. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Arit, what about you?
So there are two elements I could add to that. One of them is learning from mistakes. So actually sharing mistakes and sharing failures and creating the space for that across industries is really important. Having some kind of lemon price or whatever that allows people to share how they failed. And the other one is that we can also put a great emphasis on synchronization rather than collaboration, because collaboration requires a lot of decision making and there are a lot of egos involved, and you need to actually do stuff in an agreement. While when you synchronize, you can actually share a direction of travel, share an understanding of a problem space, and each organization does their own thing. So there's an interesting flexibility that is created in working with that.
Oh, I love that way of thinking. Thank you.
Louise, ever so briefly, I can see new ecosystem forming now of business partnership where, look at things like Loop. So Loop is working with Tesco's, the retailer, Unilever and the other brands to deliver stuff in a closed loop packaging model to your home and back. None of them can do it on their own. Now, there's great tensions between the retailers and the FMCGs, again, as many will know in this discussion from the other day. But they realize that for this model, they increasingly have to work together. And you're going to see more and more about the last mile home delivery to the consumer's home. Working in partnership to close the loop will become more important for business to collaborate on, not compete.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're getting towards wrapping up. If there's, I think there's potentially a couple of questions we won't get to, but we'll try to follow them up in typing in the Q&A. I wanted to ask the panel a question from Karen. How hopeful do you feel about the future? And if you do feel hopeful, where do you draw that optimism from?
I'm very hopeful, and I draw the optimism from all these amazing founders and young people I work with. So the other day I met this 16-year-old, not 16, he's 19 now, kid who is not going to uni anymore because he's working on an enzyme to recycle contaminated plastic waste. He's just 19-year-old, and he has raised around 2 million pounds already. And I talked, and I was telling him about my other challenges, and he was telling, why can't we re-engineer this bamboo to make bamboo fiber and everything? And I'm so inspired. I meet 16-year-olds talking about blockchain, and that is where the optimism is from. And I hear 9-year-olds asking me tough questions, and that's where the optimism comes from. And that's why I also put myself in contact with these young people who really are very innovative and thinking way beyond what we're thinking, solving problems, and that's where it comes from, and that's where it keeps me going as well.
Thank you. Arit, what about you? How optimistic do you feel? And if you do have optimism, where do you draw it from?
I am very optimistic. First of all, like Dhruv said, because you see the change around us and you see where education is and you see where the mindset of younger generations are, but also because I think we've crossed the threshold where actually being green is right from a business perspective. You've reached that threshold where you can actually make money out of it. You can sustain your business in the long term, and businesses are beginning to understand that. And I think that once that actually kicks in, we're going to see huge acceleration. And the last element is that actual politicians, leaders are reacting to this adaptation, and they've noticed the adaptation in the mindset across the markets and across citizens' attitudes, and are beginning to create those structural policy shifts that are necessary.
Thank you, Orit. And Mike, what about you?
The weighing scales, you know, on one side, the science is desperately bleak. The climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, plastics pollution, poverty, inequality, hunger. Everything's in a dreadful place on that side of it. And the forces of reaction that are clinging on to making money from that old system are still powerful, still dark, still out there fighting against us. But they will be beaten, because on the other side of the scales, we've got 7.6 billion people on the planet saying, we recognize now that we're in a dire place, and we expect politicians and business leaders to work with us to solve this. Secondly, as we've already said, we have the solutions. This is not about inventing something in 30 or 40 years' time that doesn't exist today. 80 or 90% of what we need to do to be a truly sustainable economy and society exists today. It's about engaging people, that critical word tonight with you as an audience, to adopt them and use them. And that side of the scale is going to prevail. And in part because brilliant people like you listening to this call stand up, step forward, and make it happen.
Brilliant. Galvanizing words to wrap up on. I'm going to have to draw us to a close now, because we always end our gatherings on time. We could talk, I'm sure, for hours more, and I'm sorry for anyone who didn't have their question answered. I think we got through the vast majority of the questions. And Anna has put a link, I believe, for the online community where we can all follow up together. Thank you so much, Mike, Orit and Dhruv, for your fascinating insights. I'm so grateful for your time and glad we could bring you together today. I think it's been a fascinating experience to learn from your different perspectives, areas of expertise, and bring together these different ideas that you have. Really, really thought-provoking. And thank you to everyone who's joined and made this such an engaging conversation. Thank you for all the questions. Thanks for all the energetic chat. It's been really brilliant to have you all here. Just final thoughts then, final words. If you want to join in any future gatherings, then please do consider joining Marketing Kind. There's plenty of stuff coming up. Lots of really interesting stuff. Some brilliant speakers coming up. Brilliant gatherings, and lots of opportunities to connect, learn from each other, and inspire each other. And so, in fact, if you're also a member already, then do think about whether you have any friends or colleagues you'd like to invite to join. And for more information on that, please go to www.marketingkind.org. And then just a super quick recap on our upcoming gatherings. We've got our Coffee with a Cause with Marie and Renewable World, Marie, whom we met today, on February the 26th at 11 a.m. We've got an exchange on March the 11th with Seth Godin to explore the question, can all good marketing be marketing for good? I'm going to be fascinated to hear how he comes at that. So I'm sure there's going to be lots of interesting discussion on that topic. And then in April, we'll be taking on the really important global challenge of bringing an end to modern slavery. Phew! So please do consider joining us for these upcoming gatherings, joining Marketing Kind, and as I say, for more information, marketingkind.org. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined today, and a huge thank you again to our brilliant panelists. It's been fantastic to have you here tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to see you, Mike, again. Bye-bye.